Hi, I'm Rajendra Roy, the Chief Curator of Film here at the Museum of Modern Art. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this special New Directors, New Films presentation of The Killing of Two Lovers. On behalf of our colleagues at Film at Lincoln Center, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this much delayed, sadly virtual Q&A presentation, but we're very, very grateful to have the director and lead actor on the film, Robert Machoian and Clayne Crawford, here with us. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us, even if it's belated and not in Midtown Manhattan as we had hoped back in March.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So Robert, before we dive in, I did a little background research and discovered that we share a somewhat common origin story. I grew up in Seaside, California, which is Central Coast, and you're from King City and went to CUSMUC, Monterey Bay, right? Which is actually partly in Seaside, I think.
Yeah, it's basically in Seaside. That's really cool. I didn't know you came from there.
Yeah. You're not the first person I've discovered. The director of The Old Guard, Ms. Prince Bythword, also grew up on the Monterey Peninsula in Central California. So small world, but actually I found kind of relevant for what we'll be talking a little bit about today. And, you know, I mean, just to give you a sense of how long I've been a fan of this film, when I first saw it, there was, you know, another film that was kind of deep in my consciousness because we were honoring Laura Dern this time last year. And so I was like, when I saw your film, I was like, oh my God, it's like Marriage Story, but make it rural and a little bit more intense. I'm wondering if you could just talk about, you know, setting this story. I think it was you said it in Utah, and I know that you worked with the Sundance Institute where the film premiered, I think, on the development of it. Can you just talk about finding that location and working to really integrate it into the landscape there?
Yeah, I'd say writing about where I kind of live is pretty critical in my process of filmmaking. And Clayne and I were actually working on another project that we were attempting to get off the ground. And I have recently, in the last 5 years now, moved to Utah. And there's a painter, Brian Kirchiznik, who I met through a few friends that had a studio down in this little town of Kanosh. And I just needed to go somewhere where I could not procrastinate. And they were like, you got to go to this place. There's not even a store. Like you can't even, I had to bring my food in kind of thing outside of this little mercantile. And so I was down there working on this project and, you know, I would walk around to kind of get a little bit of exercise and relax the brain. And I passed the red brick house in that movie, which is funny. It wasn't like it was far away. It's like 2 blocks over from the place. But I took a picture and I sent it to Clayne and I said, you know, this is where we're making this movie and this is where your character lives. And I started to talk to him about this couple. And it was really interesting because after the studio manager came over and I was like, hey, I'm thinking about this film, about this couple. And I started to explain this idea that I had for him. And he literally just pointed like this across the street. And he's like, there's the husband, and 2 blocks or 2 houses down, he's all, there's the wife. Wow. And I was like, no way. And that felt like, you know, sometimes you look for signs in the universe to tell you to proceed. And that felt like, this has to happen. Awesome. So I finished that other project and then jumped right into kind of writing this one.
And Clayne, I mean, David is just, I mean, such an incredibly compelling character, but on both ends of the spectrum, right? Like he's totally lovable and completely terrifying at moments. I'm wondering how you guys work through the balance of creating that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think with life, that's kind of how we are as humans. You know, we're capable of extremely horrific things and then great kindness, you know, and at the same time. And I think a lot of times that's lost in cinema. I think characters are sometimes kind of put into these categories so that we can tell this story clean and concise. And this guy's going to wear a white hat and this guy's going to wear a black hat. So we have a clear understanding of who's bad and who's good. And I think it's a little more complex than that. And I think Robert and I both have always been drawn to that sort of storytelling. So I mean, when I first read this material, I think Robert, it was a short, right? Robert had created this short, and it was this story about a father just going to pick up his children from a situation where mom and dad have split up, and she's got this new boyfriend, and it turns into an argument outside, and the boyfriend ends up coming outside of the house, kind of thing. And Robert just started to build on that. And I thought it was crucial to show how much he loved his children, and that was the catalyst for his insanity. He wasn't this malicious person. He was essentially losing his grip on reality and everything that he kind of held dear. And then it didn't help that it was at the cost of this good-looking man, and kind of at home with his boys and his daughter. And so yeah, it gave me a lot to play with, which was exciting, as an actor, for sure.
Yeah. And Clayne, you've also directed, and Robert, you've written so extensively. I'm wondering how collaborative that got. I mean, clearly there's a director on this picture, and that's Robert, but I'm wondering how, that collaboration may have worked with your experience.
Here's the thing. For me, I was just a fan of Robert's work. I mean, we met at Sundance. Was it 2009, Robert? Were you up there with Jack the Rabbit?
2010.
2010. So we met, and I'd read a script of his, Nebraska, that we really wanted to make. And to answer the question, I have directed. I'm not very good at it. So when I had the opportunity to make my first film, from a financial standpoint, there was just no confusion. I wanted to work with Robert. I'd always told my wife that Robert could shoot a salt and pepper shaker, and if he shot it the right way, he could create a love affair between these two, that was forbidden. So I went into this with complete confidence, which I don't always get to do as an actor. Sometimes you have to think about the big picture because you begin to lose confidence in your leader. That wasn't the case with this. I've said only twice this has happened, and once was with Robert, and the other time was with Ray McKinnon on Rectify, that I was allowed to go into work every day and just focus on what was on my plate, and to live up to the material and this structure that we had kind of created, and just making sure that I was on par with everyone else. So yeah, my experience as a director did not come into play. If anything, I was just kind of taking notes the whole time. So
pretty high praise there, Robert. Does that check out on your side?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked a lot with non-actors, and this was a real exciting experience for me to get to look at the boundaries of actors who have just this tool, this toolbox. A lot of times when you work with non-actors, your effort is to really get a performance to about where they are in real life. So it's an interesting approach, and it's something that I actually appreciated now looking back on having made films. Is I was learning this process with Rodrigo to make people's true self appear on camera, right? So what was interesting in getting an opportunity to work with Clayne is we talked a lot about David, and because he has this talent and this bag of tools that he can pull out, I'm not trying to coach Clayne into this performance. We're creating David, and that was really exciting because for me it was really, I think for both of us, but it was finding that thing that felt very real, just like non-actors, and then you have this actor who then can create that character and then work within that realism. And that was kind of neat to me. I mean, one of the things that shocked me a little bit with God Bless the Child, nobody believed that I wrote a script. They were like, no way, you didn't write a script. It's not possible. You didn't write a script. And I was like, I did. And they're like, no, you didn't. And so it was this weird, as a writer, I was so offended, right? So then we go to make Killing of Two Lovers, and I'm like, these are all known actors. They're all really amazing. And no one will question that. And then we were somewhere and they're like, well, how much is actually written? And I was like, what?
Wow. You guys improv this entire movie.
Yeah. And that was just, I've had to, in this context, take it as a compliment that we had successfully made the character so believable that people believed that what was being said was real. And so I've since taken it that way, but I really was like, there's no way people are gonna not think there was a script here. I was like, it's Clayne, come on.
I mean,
Yeah.
knowing yourself that you had written the script and written, a really, well-researched, thought out one, and then have people believe that it doesn't exist. I actually think that's probably the highest compliment you could get, right? That it is so believably real. There are some characters in the films, though, in the film that I find equally as compelling as the humans you see on screen, and that is the light and the sound in the film. I mean, it is just a knockout, and one personal heartbreak that at this exact moment folks won't be able to see it on a big screen with great stereo sound. Eventually, hopefully we can invite the film when we get our theaters back here. But talk, both of you, a little bit about that I mean, just blew me away. And Clayne, I almost thought that they were almost scene partners for you in some ways, which you couldn't know as you were acting them. But how much of that were you potentially conscious of as you were working on set, knowing what might be coming in post-production, especially with the sound?
As it related to sound, Robert had kind of given me an idea of what they were going to do. For me, the truck became another character, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of his sanctuary. And I think some of that built to the sound design because, I mean, Robert, there was like 134 door shuts in this film. So the slamming and opening of these doors, it just seemed to fit, to kind of build that into the sound design. But as it relates to the image, again, Robert and Oscar had kind of discussed, because we had economic restrictions, on this film, and we didn't want the film to be a reflection of that. We wanted everything to be a conscious choice, and just kind of Robert seeing his storyboards and understanding that he was creating a living frame for us to kind of live within that frame. For an actor, it was the closest thing I've had to being on stage, to where there was no worry about, okay, I need to, as an actor, you have to kind of pace your performance, even in each individual scene, not just the arc over the picture. You have to be aware of when they're going to come in for close-ups, and you don't want to blow it all on the big wide, and you have to kind of have an understanding of the way they're going to cut, knowing that Robert was going to allow these shots to breathe. It allowed your motor to really get going. A lot of times as an actor, it's like a Ferrari in downtown traffic, it's just zoom, boom, zoom, boom. And with this, you were really able to get the motor running, especially in the fight sequence at the end of the film. I think that was a 17-minute take. So there is no, after you say your first line, everything else is out the door, and you're just allowing the impulses to come to you, knowing what the dialogue is going to be to kind of express that. And that was a luxury that you never get on set. So I think it played into some of these, what I feel are just incredible performances, that coupled with the amount of rehearsal that we did for each individual scene.
Well, if nothing else comes out of this Q&A, I think a Ferrari in rush hour traffic as a metaphor for the process is a keeper, man. I have not heard that before. You may have taken that from someone, but that's excellent. That is very vivid. Robert, I had another conversation as part of this series with the directors of Boys State. And I'm also thinking of what Chloe Zhao was able to do with Nomadland. And, the impression that there are no stories of these overlooked locations, people, lives that are lived. I guess we're mostly talking about rural and middle of the country. But if you could just talk about, you have extensive, writing and directing experience. What compels you? And you're living now, you grew up in King City, which I know is not the center of what people think of as California, and have a similar experience with that. What compels you to tell these stories and to make them so, so central to your practice, I guess?
Yeah, King City plays a massive role in that. Growing up, I think at the time when I was born there, it was about 5,000, and then eventually I think it's 11,000 now. It might be a little bit bigger than that. But that impacted, I experienced where I would say I grew up in a small town and people would be like, oh yeah, me too. And then it would be like Chico, California. And I'm like, that's 30,000 people, but they considered that small. And then the same thing, even now when I talk to people about where I grew up, they're like, where is that? And then I have to say, close to Monterey. And then they go, oh, that's really great. But I grew up in the Salinas Valley. For me to even mention Monterey is like offensive to me because there are rivalries between those areas, and there's definitely like not even close in the type of people and who live there. So this is this constant, like, really most of the time people only know King City if they got a ticket driving from San Francisco down to Los Angeles, right?
Which I fully have. It's that place you just,
Yeah. And so there's this forgotten element to it, even though Steinbeck was born there, right? And that, the grapes, his writing is about this area. There's still this forgotten element there. And I think that impacts me. I think I loved growing up there. I loved my friends who lived there, and the community was imperfect, completely imperfect, wrestled with the immigrant issue on field workers against like first, second generation Latinx people. It was complicated. It was a very complicated little town with good intentions. And I think that impacts greatly my writing because oftentimes we're not represented well on screen. Like I'll read scripts sometimes and it will be like the characters, your typical redneck. And I'm like, gosh, that becomes a really offensive term when it's used to just like disregard the layers of a human. And so I think in many ways, I like to write about that era or that people, one, because I come from there, but one, because there's rich material. I mean, there's very interesting stories within that community that I think are important because I think, again, we can have this microcosm that tells a large, ends up being macro. That somebody referenced to me one time that, they're, because Marriage Story had come out, and my response to them is, David and Niki would never be able to write a $25,000 check to a lawyer, ever. Like that's not an option. I know people who worked through their marriage because they couldn't afford the cost of divorce. And that's fascinating to me. I mean, it's like, wow, what situation are you in that's the reality? So I'm very interested in that richness. And I hope in a way that it's like people who live in these type of areas feel like that I'm telling their stories, that they feel heard.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't help but remark that, the way this film, you probably had a plan for this film, right? Back in January. And we were part of that to welcome you here in New York. And I'm just wondering how 2020 has changed your perception of the film. And, I'm sure there was a certain amount of disappointment at first, but, perhaps there's also a chance for this film to explode in ways that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. But yeah, just your impressions on where we are now versus where we started, what feels like a long time ago.
Yeah. That was really challenging. We were lucky enough to premiere at Sundance, which was a dream of Clayne and I's like 10 years ago. So it's like we got to live that dream, and then it just like COVID hit. And again, the new director's new film was also one of the things on my list. I posted yesterday, when I was in grad school, I dreamed of having work in the MoMA and being able to be associated with the MoMA. The dream happened, and then it was taken away, and I was like, that's not what. And then I'm so excited.
Here, you're still here. I'm sitting in the building. So
yeah. So I was so excited to again get the email. But what was really challenging for us was we had friends who had films at South by that just like premieres were just like taken from them. So I have felt consistently in this weird conflicted space because I feel that we were blessed enough to get to have this premiere at Sundance, and I know people who didn't get to have their premieres. So it was hard to have this sorrow and be like, oh my gosh, this is like the best thing I've ever made. This culmination of Clayne and I, the first day on set, I was like, what if we hate each other? This is so weird. We've been friends for 10 years, talking about working together. And we go, take one, it's like, nope, let's go home. I'm going home. We've been working, So to find out that that was real and it was like the energy was there and the what we had dreamed of happening was happening. It is very difficult to kind of not have, but I have to constantly focus on my friends who just didn't get premieres. Where we're at, to be honest, I really don't know, and it's a little bit scary in many ways because independent cinema was already struggling. And it was struggling, and it's, in my opinion, it's not a struggle that people don't want to hear these stories. It's a struggle whether those who are having a position to present those films on a large scale will care enough to make the effort. And that's when you're in the independent world, you're trying to make stuff to tell these, big studios, like, these stories matter and people do want to hear them. And if you play this in a theater in Lincoln, Nebraska, people will go watch it. I promise you they will. And you're making these pleas in the process of making these films. Like, can we make it so good that you're willing to take a risk on us? There's small margin of errors for independent cinema. So COVID hitting that is scary in the independent market. I'm trying to remain optimistic. Independent started to look at video on demand as a way to kind of be reborn, and there's a lot of optimism there, and I still hold that optimism. But when they're going to dump Wonder Woman on HBO, you're just like, okay, so if the studios move into this market, it's like, Criterion needs to like hold the mantra and be like, we're going to support independent cinema somehow. Somebody has to. We need somebody to help, and that's my apprehension.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've got your champions out here in the field, and we're happy to be one of them. Many of us are, we're launching streaming services, right? Because that's not. I mean, I'm an analog movie guy. I much prefer to do this in person, on stage. And I promise we would have bottles of whatever you're drinking there, Clayne, to send you.
My wife's homemade kombucha is what I'm drinking here.
Some of that for the canteen here. So this is New Directors, New Films. I'm just wondering, as a final question, what's up next for both of you, since everyone's going to be looking forward to your careers as they flourish, which they will. Clayne, maybe we start with you. What's up next for you?
Robert and I start shooting Monday, our second film together.
Fantastic. So it's one shot answer. You both are working together. Are you? Is it on location again, or is this where you?
Well, we were going to shoot in Utah. This is a story that Robert and I wanted to tell. I mean, this might have been outside of Nebraska. This was one of the first films we were going to try to make. And after The Killing of Two Lovers, because we shot that in December of 2018. So it's been almost 2 years, right, since that journey, and we were both just itching. And when we sold the film, we had signed a deal, but everyone was so hesitant to kind of shoot in COVID. And Robert and I just felt that there's an element that would come through, and this story kind of fits, ironically, in a world. Robert wrote the script in 2008 after the economic crisis, and it felt like now, it's about a husband and wife that moved to a rural community, and they're trying to start their life here and find a way of sustainability. And how can they kind of learn to live off the land in a sense while keeping their 9-to-5s, but starting to learn how to can and garden and so forth. And it seems more relevant today than it did when we were wanting to make this 10 years ago. So we're excited, and we're going to shoot it in Alabama, which is where I have a farm out here. And we kind of made that pivot at the last minute. But I think it's going to suit the film really well. And we're, as Robert kind of was saying, you look for these signs because everything is telling you, do not make a movie right now. And we continue to just try to open ourselves up to the universe. It's like, if this is going to put anyone in danger, if there's any chance that we're not going to be able to continue and finish this film, then please and everything has just been shoving us in the direction to go make another movie. So I'm extremely excited. I feel like throwing up talking about it right now, but I'm definitely I'm excited about starting. I mean, Robert flies here on Friday, day after Thanksgiving, so we're ready to jump in.
Yeah.
That's actually really inspiring news. So kudos to you both, and thank you both, Robert and Clayne, for joining us here. Congrats, and we can't wait to welcome you to New York and show this movie on a big screen someday. So
Yeah.
thank you both. Congrats again. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
All right,
Bye.
we'll see you.